All right. Happy Tuesday, seniors. Today we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the modern issues that have arisen in journalism. So we spent the last week and a half or so talking about the history of journalism, talking about the events that led us to where we are today in the United States. So you have a pretty good background understanding how journalism came to be what it is today. And so using that background as a foundation, we're now going to start talking about modern issues that journalists are facing based on kind of the history that led them to where we're at today and the current social climate that we have in the United States today and how that kind of affects journalists. So there was the development of newspapers and magazines as the main way to spread information, and through these outlets people started caring more about issues beyond just local news. So they started caring about global news, and they started caring about what was going on in sports, and started caring about cultural news and events that were going on, what socialites were up to. That's when you started to see trends in like engagements being posted, and celebrities started appearing in newspapers and stuff like that. We start hearing about what's going on with athletes and teams outside of their season, stuff like that. You got more updates on those information. I can't talk today. We also see a rise in opinion-based news. Editorials are becoming a major thing. People are able to write into newspapers and get their opinions published. We see fashion becoming a topic of interest. We see, culture in terms of movie reviews and play reviews and stuff like that becoming more and more common in newspapers. So all of these things start developing more and more, and news starts to get more and more personalized so that readers have access to really any kind of information they want, not just like your typical news about what's going on in your society, like your right away your community, but also what's going on globally, what's going on in all these different aspects within society. So that's kind of cool just seeing that develop, but obviously with that development, when there's more and more things to report on, you need to have more and more in-depth reporters. You need to have a rise in people who are able to correctly look into those topics and discuss them well. So that makes it harder when there's more topics to cover for news to be reliable and honest and open and truthful. So these issues kind of started rising, but nothing really crazy, nothing that gets the public skeptical quite yet. We see the rise in television, obviously in broadcasted news, so every night the news is able to have a 30-minute to an hour segment, depending on where you lived and what kind of news you wanted to watch, where you're able to get live broadcast information about what's going on. And obviously this leads to super updated, immediate news. So that comes into play when we have issues like 9/11. When we were able to get updates right away, immediately by watching the TV. We didn't have to wait for the newspaper to come out the next day to get that information. So with the rise of modern technology, with the rise of the television, with the rise of the internet, also comes a demand for news to be immediate. And with that comes even more pressure for journalists to be super, super on top of the information that they are researching and giving out. When you only have a couple minutes to find out the most updated information on something, it becomes a lot harder to make sure your information is reliable and accurate. And this obviously led to an increase in unrealistic expectations for journalists to always be super, super aware of what's going on. And so because of that, we start seeing public skepticism toward journalists, and we also start seeing journalists presenting information that wasn't true and wasn't factual because they found it quickly and didn't take the time to research more deeply or to fact check because of this demand for instant news. So all these issues kind of come together to create kind of really problematic need for on-demand news that then spreads to lots of other issues in modern journalism. So that's kind of a little bit about how these issues in modern journalism came to be. Just with the rise of the internet, with the rise of television, comes the need for immediate access to information. And with that need, it's kind of unrealistic to expect people to be super, super up to date and be able to provide super in-depth analysis of information right away. So there's just more room for error. And then this leads to a distrust of the media, and it kind of just snowballs from there. But before we get into that, just a little bit more about the internet. The very first newspaper that kind of chose to use the internet as a way to get news out to the public was USA Today. They went online in 1995, and then later in that same year, CNN went online, and then it wasn't long after that before all news sites were publishing online as well as in print. And then today, of course, many major news sites only use online to get their information out there. Very few are still in print just because that's not as high demand right now. And then from there, the year 2000 brought with it kind of free access to journalism. That was a trend in the internet, and there was the access of information to the public without having to subscribe to a specific news site. You were able to get that information for free through people who maybe had read the news and were able to publish it on their own for free, or news sites stopping subscription costs because they saw a lack in subscribers, different things like that. There were a lot of different factors that led to, essentially in the year 2000, the internet providing free news. Free news is awesome. It's really important for the public to have that. Like, I'm super thankful that we have free news, and you should be too, because then that makes news accessible to everyone. You're not limited by your socioeconomic status and how you can receive information. It's similar to the penny press, but more modern implications. However, that obviously hurts news corporations because they aren't able to make as much money, and so then they have to kind of combat that by getting more stories out there and getting public interest higher so that people are willing to subscribe, to get more information, to read more in depth on stuff. And again, that kind of leads back to those initial issues of, what's the line and how quickly you can get information, when that means compromising in-depth research and making sure your facts are straight, and kind of taking your own personal issues out of the article, because when you're writing quickly, there's more room for error, there's more room for bias. Again, of course, bias isn't always wrong, but sometimes it's not appropriate in news articles, and so then, we just have this conglomeration of issues coming in, trying to combat free news, trying to combat loss of circulation, all these issues. So again, we just see the rise of more and more issues in modern news due to the rise of the internet and the demand for news kind of to be on 24/7. And so because of this, a lot of newspapers faced bankruptcy. Rocky Mountain News in Denver ended up going bankrupt. The Chicago Tribune, LA Times, lots of news corporations since 2000 have actually ended up going bankrupt because they just couldn't keep up with the public demand for quick and free news. They weren't able to sustain themselves. So that's one major issue that also came from this, is the lack of money in journalism. And that kind of leads to some 4 major trends that we see in journalism today, 4 major issues that have been deemed the 4 characterizations of journalism, basically. So there's 4 different categories you can put journalism today into. One of those is globalization, which is the need to make news global. Because of the internet, anyone, anywhere in the world can access this news, so you have to provide a lot of background information, a lot of detailing, make sure that anyone who read this, no matter where they were in the world, would understand exactly what was going on without the context of having to live in that specific place. So for example, we're able to understand what's going on in foreign affairs, we're able to understand what's going on in countries like Iran and Iraq through the globalization of news, because the reporters reporting on those issues are able to provide for us a lot of background, in-depth information. In order to help us understand what's going on there. Obviously, if we lived there, we wouldn't need all of that background information. We'd understand it contextually, but the globalization of news requires that you provide all this background information so that any reader anywhere is able to understand what's going on. On the flip side of that, you have the localization of news, which is kind of the understanding that the people receiving your news understand the context of your area. So when we watch like Q2 or our local news, we understand what's going on because we live in Billings. We don't need a lot of excess information explained to us. If someone came in from outside of Billings and started watching that news, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to them, but it's not supposed to. That's a localized news. So that's 2 kinds of journalism that exists. And then there's 2 other categories, and that's the pauperization of news, which is the idea that news is becoming really, really poor. It's accessible to anyone because it's free. The news industry isn't funded by money as much anymore, and so you have free access to information, and so that's kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's awesome that we have access to free news, but again, on the flip side of it, it's kind of problematic that journalists are losing a lot of money. There's not as much incentive to go into journalism because it's not a very lucrative field. Journalists aren't able to pay for themselves. Basically, they're going bankrupt, and so when you have bankruptcy, you also tend to have, when you see major corporations going bankrupt, there's more desperation, and so then again, that leads people to question the reliability of news, and it leads news outlets to kind of just, they're struggling a little bit, they're drowning a little bit, and there's issues that come with that you guys will research on your own. So the pauperization of news, again, is basically just the understanding that news sites are losing money, they are more poor, they're not able to get the funding that they need, and so because of that, sometimes the news that we receive reflects that, where it's poor quality, it's poorly done, it's not fact-checked, it's, because of a lack of editors, it's not held super highly accountable, and so that's kind of another trend that you might see. And then finally, we have personalization of news, which came about as a result of 9/11. So some background on that: when 9/11 happened, if you were to Google Twin Towers a couple hours after it happened, you wouldn't have been able to find anything recent because Google hadn't been set up in a way that it would immediately link you to news updates or anything like that. And so because of this, Google developed like the news tab that you see when you do Google searches, and it also started using algorithms to give you updated information that's more personalized. So because of 9/11, because of the terrorist attacks, we're now able to access information right away. As soon as news reporters post something on it, you can go on Google and search it. So like last week when the governor reported the stay-at-home mandate, you could have gone on and Googled that. And because Google is aware of where we're at geographically, and because Google is aware of maybe our previous search history, or it's aware of news sites that immediately responded to that, we're able to see that right away without having to do much digging. Google immediately pulls that up for us. So that's called the personalization of news. That's the fourth trend in journalism that we see today. And that's just basically the ability for news to become personalized to us when we search it. I, in Montana, am able to search things and get news that Google deems most relevant to me based on algorithms that trace my geographic location, my demographics, my previous search history, that kind of thing. So, again, 4 major trends in journalism today that came about as a result of some of the issues in journalism, and that came about as a result of the rise of the internet as a means of spreading information, are the popularization of news, the globalization of news, the localization of news, and the personalization of news. So those four things are 4 major trends that have come about as a result of modern issues in journalism, and that have come about because of the rise of the internet and the need for like 24 access, high demand news. So that's just a little bit about modern news, how the internet got us to where we're at with the media today, and there is just a surplus of issues that have come as a result of that. Obviously, there's a lot of good things that have come as a result of that. The high access to news, the immediate access to news, the ability to find out what's going on. No matter who you are, no matter what your socioeconomic status is, you always have access to the news and to that information. However, there are just an abundance of issues that journalists are facing today to kind of combat that. We're still in this transition stage. The internet is still relatively new. Using the internet as a means to get information out there is still new. So we're kind of living in a historical period where we're trying to solve a lot of the issues that have come up as a result of that. And as we kind of iron out those issues, ideally, if we follow, the trends of history, once we get all of these issues out, then the media and internet will become more reliable places for us to access information. It won't be as viewed so skeptically. It won't be so highly questioned. It'll be legit. It'll be a place where people can go for reliable information. But right now we're in that transition period of the internet is here and it's led to a lot of issues in reporting. So how do we address and combat these issues? So that's kind of the era that we're in. So that's what you guys are going to start looking at with your assignment today. You can choose to either do one paper that you'll spend the next 2 weeks working on, and I have that assignment sheet up in Classroom, or you can choose to do 5 assignments. You're going to end up with basically the same results, so it just depends on if you want to work on one thing or if you like one bigger thing or 5 smaller things. It's up to you guys how you choose to do that. So what you're going to do with the assignment is you're just going to pick 2 issues in modern journalism, and you're just going to have questions kind of every other day that you're going to have to research and respond to. And then the alternative is that you're going to have an in-depth research paper examining, again, 2 to 3 issues in modern journalism that you're going to be just deep diving into. So if you have any questions, please just shoot me an email. I know we're all getting a little bit stir crazy and definitely feeling the effects of social isolation. I can't even talk today. That's how much this is affecting me. So I would encourage you to definitely limit your screen time. I'm going to give you guys until April 13th to get all this done, and you can work on it at your own pace. I just want to encourage you guys to focus on your mental and emotional health right now, because I think everyone's getting a little weird, getting a little lonely. I'm having a hard time even just talking and communicating straightforward because I've just been alone for the past week during the day working from home, and I think most of you are in the same boat. So I just want to encourage you to spend some time playing a game or reading a book or doing something that you like that's a hobby, even if that's just watching TV or playing video games. Try to cook something new, try a new activity when it's nice out on days not like today. Get outside, spend some time doing that. School is important, and I want you guys to prioritize your education, but I also understand that we're all kind of in the same boat of definitely feeling the effects of this. It's really draining. And it's isolating and kind of lonely. And so if you're feeling that, definitely don't feel any pressure to get this done. Don't rush into it. Take your time with school, dedicate a couple hours a day to it, and then spend the rest of your day kind of focusing on your own health, because we are still in the middle of a pandemic. Treat yourself well, I guess. yeah, that's all for today. Sorry for kind of rambling a little bit. If you have any questions, please let me know. Make sure you review the slides as usual, and I will post those assignments as well. So have a good Tuesday.